The Fletcher Seventh-day Adventist Church is a Christian people who believe Jesus is the Son of God, the hope of the world, who died on the cross to redeem us all for eternal life with God. Our purpose is to lift Jesus up and love people in. Visit our website at www.fletchersda.org. And now be blessed by the Holy Spirit as you listen to a Bible message.
Today's scripture reading will be found in Mark 14:26 through 31, NIV.
When they had sung a hymn, they went to the Mount of Olives. You will all fall away, for Jesus told them. For it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered.
But after I have risen, I will go ahead of you into Galilee. Peter declared, even if all fall away, I will not. Truly I tell you, Jesus answered, today, yes, tonight, before the rooster crows twice, you yourself will disown me 3 times. But Peter insisted emphatically, even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you. And all the others said the same.
Would you bow your heads with me? God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be pleasing in your sight. God, you the rock who we stand on. God, you the Redeemer who rescues us when we've fallen off that rock. God, speak to us in this place. May your words be what are heard today in this place. We love you because you first loved us, Jesus. We ask all of this in your name. Amen. Well, Congressman Jim Ryan had a long career as a representative from Kansas in Washington, D.C. But before that, he achieved what he was probably more famous for. Back in high school, he was such a good runner, such a fast runner, that as a high school student, he actually made the U.S. Olympic team to race in different races. He actually ran in 3 different Olympic games, 64, 72. I think, what was the other one? I wrote this down to make sure I got it right. 64, 68, and 72. Anyone young enough to know who this guy is? Raise your hands. All right. Young and proud of it. I like it. This dude was so fast. In high school, he ran a mile in under 4 minutes. He was the fastest mile at that point, I believe, 3 minutes, 55 seconds. Just blazing fast. At his second Olympics, he actually won the silver medal in the race he ran. And so this guy was just like this rock star. He said that every time he came home back to his small town in Kansas from a race somewhere, especially from the Olympics, but any race he was out running, he came back to hundreds and hundreds of people at the bus station just cheering for him with signs. I mean, this kid was a rock star. ESPN recently voted him as the best high school athlete ever. That's over Tiger Woods. That's over Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Like, this guy was voted number 1 over every other high school athlete ever. So the guy was no joke. And so all of the eyes that were on him just expected great things. Everyone expected Jim Ryan to do something great. And so as the Olympic Games approached in Germany, he was going to be racing in Munich, and everyone's expecting this kid to really step it up because he was going to be down at sea level. The altitude wasn't going to be messing with him. He won silver in Mexico before. I mean, this guy is just ready to go. He's like the favored, kind of the golden child of the American team. So he gets to Munich. He's ready to go. All the eyes of the world are on him. And as he's racing in his first race, just a qualifying round, not even the real race, he's just blazing around the track. And the next thing he knows, he's like looking up in the sky, like kind of dazed, and he realizes, I fell. And he had been trained for this. His coach trained him because that happens in these races. You're running so close, you clip a heel, someone trips you on purpose or accidentally, and you're down because you're running so fast, you just hit the ground. And so he jumped up because the coach had trained him, don't think about why you fell, just get up and start running again. And he did that, but as he did, he realized that he was so far behind that he had knocked himself out. So it wasn't just a stumble, fall, get up. It was down, boom, head. He's out of it for a few seconds, gets up, and the pack is already gone. And that's it. mean, that was the end. He didn't qualify. So during the qualifying race, he's done. And as he limps to the finish line, coaches from other teams are coming up to tell him, man, you were failed. There's no chance they're not going to overturn this. Just appeal this, and the judges are going to let you back in. The officials will let you back in the next race because you were clearly fouled. Everyone saw it. But no one offered to help him write the appeal. So he wasn't sure what to do, and so he kind of half-heartedly wrote some stuff, and he went to one of the officials, and no one would listen. And he finally went to one official in particular, and this interaction stuck with him because he looked at the official and said, I was fouled, everyone agrees. And the guy said, well, yeah, maybe you were, but you know, I don't have time for this. Come back in 4 years. Don't worry about it. Right? Come back in 4 years. The problem is that it's an amateur sport, right? You can't make money. And he had a young wife. He had a child with another child on the way. He had graduated high school by now. He needed a career. And him and his wife had already agreed this was going to be the last Olympics he ran. And he was okay with that. They'd agreed that as a couple, that this was it. He's probably going to win the gold medal anyway, so you might as well go out big. This is it. There was no 4 years later. Someone tripped him. It was stolen from him. He stumbled, he fell, and his career was over. He was bitter, he was angry, understandably, but that was it. There was nothing he could do about it. He stumbled, he fell. And the story that was read today so beautifully by these young women, the story of Peter, probably the story he's known the most for. We talked about this in Young Adult Sabbath School this morning, and we discussed kind of the irony of all the good things he did in life, and Peter did a lot of great things. He's known for this one. People talk about this the most. Oh, Peter is the denier, like Thomas is the doubter. Like, we're so hard on these guys, right? But the reality is, this is a pivotal moment in Peter's life, and we see him dialoguing with Jesus, and Jesus says, you're going to fall, you're going to deny me. And that's just a fact, Peter. And Peter says, no, it's not going to happen. And Jesus says, yeah, it's going to happen. I'm guaranteeing you it's going to happen tonight. And there's a word here in Greek that we don't see because we're reading it in English, but when Jesus looks at Peter and he says, Peter, you're going to deny me, you're going to fall away, it's translated different ways because the Greek word is the word scandalon, from which we get the English word scandal, scandalize. But back then, the word didn't have as clear of a meaning, and it was used in a lot of different ways. One of the ways it was used was to describe this stick that was in a trap to catch an animal. The animal goes for this trap that's been laid for it, and boom, and it gets the animal. Another word this is used for, another way this word is used, is to use the word, maybe the English term, a stumbling block, where you're the one that trips someone up, right? So this gentleman, Jim Ryan, is running, someone trips him up, he was scandaloned, he was scandalized, he was scandalon, he was tripped up, he went down. And so Jesus looks at Peter and he says, you're going to be scandalon tonight. You will fall. And Peter says, no, I won't. And we know the end of the story, he did fall. So we don't need to dwell on that. But what I think is important is looking at why Peter fell and what we can learn from that and what this tells us about Peter, what this tells us about God. This race that Peter lost, this race that Peter himself tripped himself up in and fell flat on his face. And he's kind of known for that now. But it jumps in here. If you want to join in, it's in Mark 14, verse 27 to 31. We're just going to look at this one little section here today. Verse 29, I'm going to kind of skip around a little bit here. Verse 29, Peter says this, even if all fall away, I will not. And then it says, he said emphatically, even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you. Strong words, right? I mean, of all the things that you can say against Peter, you can never say he lacked confidence, right? And I know some of us can relate, some of us can't. Some of us, like to play our cards carefully and hold our chips close. And that's got its own challenges and strengths, right? That might not be who you are. But those of you who know Peter, know him well, where you're the one that you overstate your case maybe. You maybe say too much, you promise too much. But Peter means it, right? Peter speaks up confidently. And in America, that can get you a long way, can't it? Is confidence going to hurt you at work? If you kind of like fake it till you make it, people say, right? Is that generally going to be a characteristic that's going to hold you back at your job or kind of like get you a little farther? What do you think? In America, overconfident, help you or hurt you? help. I mean, if you mess up, obviously, that's not going to help you. But if you're just presenting yourself as maybe more confident or more knowledgeable than you are, it's going to help you. We tend to buy into that. We're like, oh yeah, I like confidence. That's good leadership. Step out there. I'd rather you make a mistake than not try. I was told that by a construction guy I worked with who yelled at me when I made mistakes. I was like, you don't really mean that. He did and he didn't. But confidence is something that we value highly. Swagger. If you're in the dating world and you act confident, you're going to get more dates than someone who's like, I don't know if I'm even worth dating, right? Like, if you're looking for the promotion, someone's interviewing you, they're going to go with the more confident person generally. It's just the way it works. And so if Peter was applying for a job, he'd probably get the job. If Peter was going out on dates, he'd probably get more dates. If Peter was looking for friends, he'd probably get more interest from people wanting to hang out with him. Like, Peter's got confidence, and it takes him a long way. But the problem is that we see Peter trip on his own confidence. That Peter is scandalized, he is scandaloned by his confidence. The very thing that was one of his strengths, that led Peter to risk things. Peter was impetuous. And I read in a commentary somewhere, it was a powerful point that I hadn't thought of. It's asked this question. They said, we're so hard on Peter, but wouldn't you rather have someone like Peter than someone who's apathetic in your life? Right? Someone who's passionate and excited. Maybe they get a little too passionate, a little too excited, and they overstate things, but they're in it, and they're risking things, right? That's not a bad character trait. But at the end of the day, it's not always enough to carry you through. And not only is it not enough to carry you through, it can itself be your own downfall. Because the problem is that confidence tends to focus on the external rather than the internal. It focuses on what your perception of me is, more on what the reality of me is. And so when I start worrying too much about presenting myself as confident and effective and knowledgeable, I might very easily miss the reality that there are areas in my life where I am not knowledgeable and I should be learning. And there are areas of my life where I'm maybe not effective and I should work on those areas. Maybe there's a reason I should be insecure about some things in my life and work on them, rather than be too focused on you thinking I'm confident, you thinking I'm effective, you thinking I'm this and that, right? When Jesus uses the term hypocrite, that's a term taken directly out of Greek theater, artistic culture. What happened was only men played roles, and so they had to wear masks if they're going to play a woman, right? Or if they wanted to play some crazy character, you wear a mask. There's nothing wrong with it, but you're putting on an identity that isn't yours. And so when Jesus says, you hypocrites, right? He's saying you put on a mask that doesn't represent who you really are. You put on the mask of confidence. You put on the mask of swagger. You put on the mask of knowing more than you know. And sometimes that'll pull you through. Sometimes you fake it and then you make it. But what happens when you fake it and then you don't make it? And Peter's so focused on how he's perceived, he skips right over a deep reality here that I hadn't even thought of. One of the young adults pointed this out again today. The prophecy Jesus makes is this. He says, the shepherd will be struck and all the sheep will be scattered. What's the bigger problem with this story here? What's the bigger detail Peter should have latched onto? What's going to happen to the shepherd? The shepherd's going to be struck down. Peter doesn't even notice that. He makes it all about himself. I will not be scattered. Well, what's going to scatter you? Jesus being killed. Wait, hold on. Maybe I should think about that for a second. Yeah, Jesus being struck. I'm not going to fail you, even if all the other ones do. It's just competitive. It's all about him. He's not even willing to leave it at, I won't fail you. I'll be faithful. He says, even if they're not, which they probably won't because they're all idiots. We all know this, Jesus, wink, wink, right? I'm not as stupid as they are. It's all about him. Jesus doesn't matter in the equation of Peter's story. The other people don't matter in the equation in Peter's story, in the narrative of Peter's story. It's all about Peter. It's all about Peter presenting himself as confident and effective and knowledgeable and successful. And then Peter fails. The Swedish used to be a major naval power back in like the 1600s. Now they're like pacifist. They figured they didn't do so well in war, so they might as well be pacifists and just hang out, which is probably a good decision. They built this ship to go and fight the Polish. The Polish were their nemesis right there on the Baltic Sea. And so they were fighting back and forth, and the Swedish Navy decided they were going to build the biggest ship that had ever been constructed. And they built this thing, huge. It's called the Vasa. If you go to Sweden, if any of you have been to Stockholm, you can see the Vasa. It's there. It's this monstrous ship. Even by standards of today, it's impressive. Back in that day, it was just this monstrosity. They built this thing towering in the sky. They filled it with more cannon than any ship had ever held in the history of ships, full of cannon, just bristling with arms. And then on top of that, they covered it with statues and sculptures and carvings depicting the Swedish beating on the Polish. So it's like them standing on their heads and got you, right? The whole thing's covered with propaganda. The Swedes are so awesome. The Polish stink. We're going to come and get you. And they build this beautiful, fantastically huge, armed, amazing ship. And they set sail into the harbor. And 10 minutes later, it sunk to the bottom of the sea. And they're like, that's awkward. It was never seen again for 300 years. They pulled it back up and put it in a museum. And now they make money off tourists looking at their dumb ship, right? Go see it. It's super cool. I'm Norwegian, so I make fun of the Swedes. That's our job. If you're from Minnesota, you'd agree. So what happened was the ship just disappears, and for like 300 years, nobody talks about it. They're like, I don't know what happened. It was this mystery. And scientists and historians tried to figure out like what had happened with this ship, because the thing should have sailed. The Swedes weren't idiots. These guys were descendants of Vikings. They were like seafaring people going back generations. So like, what happened with this ship? It just flipped over and sunk. And so back in the 1970s, when they were able to pull this thing up, that was one of the first things people wanted to know. They're like, check this thing out. Like, why did it sink? What's this thing? We want to know this mystery here. And they found out something fascinating. When they took the measurements and looked at these things and put it in computer programs, they realized that for all of the work that was done on the ship, all of the artwork, all of the carvings, all of the cannons, all of the sexy, external, beautiful, impressive details that they had put time and energy and money into, the one thing that they had not spent time, energy, or money on was something that was not interesting, not sexy, something you'll never see, but that was the downfall of the ship. Down deep in the heart of the ship is something called ballast, and they had got it wrong, and the ship, when it hit the winds, flipped over and sank. It was that simple. They were so concerned about the externalities, about things that are fine, that are okay, but they missed the deep, dark parts that no one ever sees, the heart of the ship. And so it sank. How's the ballast in your heart today? There's nothing wrong with confidence. There's nothing wrong with faking it till you make it. That's okay. But if we're not concerned equally with the ballast of our hearts, then we're going to end up just like Peter did, scandalon, flipped over, our back on the ground, looking up in the sky, because we focused on the externals. We focused on things that people see in us, things that we do get credit for, that we can get promotions over, when the reality is our heart, the ballast is off. And so that's one danger Peter realizes here. He's focusing on the external. He's not focusing on the internal. He gets it wrong and he's gone. But that's not where it stops here. In verse 27, go back to Jesus' words. He says, "You will all fall away. I will strike the shepherd. The sheep will be scattered." And then in verse 30, he says, "I tell you the truth," Jesus answered. "Today, yes, tonight, before the rooster crows twice, you yourself will disown me 3 times. Jesus makes an awkward statement here, which fits in with our sermon series. We're talking about the tough words of Jesus, the things Jesus said that are maybe not as comfortable for us. And for those of us who do believe in free will, that we don't believe in predestination, that we believe that you have the ability to kind of choose your fate to a point, Jesus says other things that support that, but in this situation, he almost challenges that a bit. He doesn't say to Peter, "Peter, if you make the wrong decisions tonight, it's not going to end well." Or, "Peter, if you go down this road, this bad situation is going to happen." He says, "No, Peter, I'm promising you tonight you will fall. At this point, no matter what you do, you're going to fall tonight. And I'll give you the details of how you're going to fall tonight. And the fall will be great." Jesus challenges our idealism a little bit here, I think. We can believe that since we're following Jesus, we have all of the tools that we need to do what he asks us to do. And again, ideologically, that's correct. But the danger is when we don't realize the brokenness in our own hearts. For the verses in the Bible that say that you can follow Jesus, there's also verses like your heart is deceptive beyond all things. That even when you want to do right, you're doing wrong. That you do right for the wrong reasons, which makes it even more terrible. At least people doing wrong for wrong reasons are open about it, right? We, as followers of God, do the right things for the wrong reasons. There's verses like 1 John where he says, those who claim to be without sin make God out to be a liar. The Bible, for all its good news, also has some very dark news about our hearts. That we can follow Jesus, we can surrender to Jesus, we can be like Peter, where we're literally willing to risk our lives for him, to say, Jesus, I will risk my life for you. And when Peter is faced with the reality of Jesus' demise, what does he reach for? Does he run off? He reaches for his sword. Peter's willing to go down in a blaze of glory. Peter's not lying when he says, Jesus, I will die with you. Because for Peter to pull out his sword against the temple guards, he's the only one that has a weapon here, it sounds like. The other disciples don't pull anything out, or they just leave him hanging. They're like, you're on your own there, Peter. So Peter pulls out his weapon to defend Jesus. Peter's willing to take a kamikaze flight here. Peter's willing to take out some guys. And when he swings for the guy's ear, he's not swinging for his ear, right? We hear that story, like when you reach out, cut off his ear. I mean, Peter's just taking a wild swing, and the guy, ducks, and it nicks his ear, most likely is what happened. And Jesus stops the whole situation and heals the guy's ear and makes his statement about putting his sword away and all this stuff. But we sometimes miss that reality that Peter's willing to die for Jesus, isn't he? Peter thinks that because he's willing to die for Jesus, it means he's also willing to live for Jesus. And living for Jesus is oftentimes much harder than it is dying for Jesus, because dying takes a moment, a blaze of glory, and it's not to take that away from Peter or someone else who's willing to risk that. But the boring daily life of following Jesus through the mundane details of your life and your existence, when you come up against denial where you might not even know it, when we read Peter's story of him denying Jesus, it's as if he doesn't even notice it, right? Because the rooster crows later and he's like, whoa, I just realized what I did. It's just so natural to Peter that even though he does love Jesus, even though he's willing to risk his life for Jesus, is Peter's heart perfectly pure at that point? It's not. And again, it's not to take something away from Peter. We tend to be hard on Peter. Peter loves Jesus so much. Peter's willing to literally risk his life for Jesus. But at the end of the day, that doesn't mean that Peter's heart is not deceptive. It doesn't mean that Peter's heart doesn't have dark places still. And Peter doesn't want to think about that. He wants to focus on, I love Jesus. I'm willing to risk my life for Jesus. I'm being faithful to Jesus. I'm doing everything Jesus asks. But there's still these dark parts of his heart. And the fact that Peter doesn't look at those, that he rushes past those. Oh, yeah, sure, I can be dishonest at times, but that's, I usually am honest. Well, sure, I can be a little bit selfish, but isn't everyone a little bit selfish? Yeah, I can be kind of cocky and prideful. Sure, I can be mean. Sure, I can be deceptive. Whatever, you fill in the blanks. You know what your heart has. The deceptive heart each one of us carries. That when we become too idealistic, that yes, I've given my heart to Jesus, he's given me a new heart. Yeah, he has, but is that all playing out in every detail right now how you'd like it to? Probably not. And when we focus too much on the idealistic, we can miss the reality and end up tripping just like Peter, scandalized by the fact that we haven't focused on the reality of who we really are. Expectations matter. Sociologists studied marriage. Everyone finds marriage super fascinating because no one seems to know how to make it work very well, even though everyone does it. And we're like, how does this work actually? And so sociologists are constantly studying it to learn more. And they asked a question that hadn't been asked before, this one group. They said, what's happier? Western marriages that are decided by the people who get married, they fall in love, they date, they learn each other, they make that decision on their own. Or Eastern marriages where the family and the community chooses. You're a good match. Your family's nice. Her family's nice. There you go. It's done. Haven't met yet? Yeah, you'll meet at the wedding. Don't worry about it. Like, which one is happier? And in the West, we assume, obviously, of course, it's Western marriages. There's a lot of divorce, but, when they work, they're happier. But the shocking reality that these researchers found that it was absolutely the opposite of what we would expect. And this wasn't just in the moment, like who's happier when they get married. They did this long study year after year after year where they followed couples, and they asked them every year, what's your level of fulfillment? Explain to us how your marriage is working. Do you guys work well together? Do you have affection? How does it work? And they found out that the Western marriages Started out great because everyone was excited and they did love each other and they had so much in common. But as time went on, even the ones that survived tended to have a lot of struggles. Where in the Eastern arranged marriages, they found the shocking reality that at the beginning it was awkward. They literally don't know each other. Welcome to the wedding night. Who are you again, right? You don't know who this person is. The first year of marriage, you're just literally learning. You've not dated. You're dating after getting married, basically, right? Super awkward. I hope this works. But as the years went on, the levels of satisfaction went up and up and up and up and up. Until later in life, it was almost an opposite experience. The Eastern marriages that had been basically forced on them, they were happy and loved each other and really, really cared for each other and had beautiful relationships. And so many of the Western marriages had either fallen apart or just were limping along. And they asked themselves, why? Why? This makes no sense. And they finally came down to the reality of one thing, and that was expectations. The people going into the Western marriages expected they'd put in the hard work, they'd gone to counseling, they'd learned about each other, they understood marriage, they'd done all the right groundwork, and so therefore it was going to be what? Great. It was going to be good. The people going into the Eastern marriages knew they had not done any of the work because they don't even know each other. They knew they probably weren't compatible because they have no idea who the other person is. They know there's going to be conflict. They know there's going to be awkwardness. They're expecting that they're going to have to work. They're expecting that they're going to have to compromise. They're expecting there's going to be awkward character traits about each other they're going to have to navigate. So they go in expecting, man, if this is going to be fun, we're going to have to make this fun. And ironically, they do. These people going in think, oh, I did all the work, and so the minute something hard happens, oh no, maybe I made the wrong choice, right? Shoot, I didn't know that detail. If I would have known that, I shouldn't have married. I got the wrong one, right? It's all about finding the magical right one, and then it works, and so if it doesn't work, so I chose the wrong one, and you start to disconnect. Expectations matter. And I believe that happens in our relationship with God as well. What are our expectations about walking with God? Do we believe that, man, I followed Jesus, now everything's going to go great? And we would say, well, no, I don't believe that. But really? Because when things go wrong, we get so angry. Well, I followed God. I paid my tithe. Why did that go wrong? That should have paid out. This equation, I paid this. I raised my kids this way. Why didn't God make this do that, right? All of these details that go wrong make us question, well, did I really do the right thing? Did I really choose the right thing? Where is God? Is God really kind? And the expectations of what it's going to look like suddenly can affect the way it plays out. When Peter believes, I'm following Jesus, so I'm right. I'm part of the kingdom of God, so we're going to conquer. I'm part of Jesus' group, right? I'm one of Jesus' closest friends, so everything's going to be okay. And Jesus looks at Peter and says, no, it's not. You love me, but you're going to mess up because your heart is deceitful. And I think, again, the warning for us here is that we can get so caught up in these realities that are good and they're internal. I want to believe that God is this, and I want to believe that God is that, and I want to follow God and be faithful. And I believe I've given my heart to God. And yet oftentimes we don't want to do the hard work of the day-to-day activities of being faithful and simply loving people. Paul says, I die to self daily, right? Paul is not ideological. He says, I do the things I don't want to do, and I don't do the things I want to do. We struggle. And how often do we come into church communities where we're almost forced to put on that facade, right? To act confident, to not be able to say, you know what, I have a hard time believing there's an afterlife. I want to, but I'm really scared. What if that's not true, right? What if you admit that to Adventists who are name is about the Advent? You're I have a hard time believing that. Would you be okay with that? Could you be with a person that was that way? Would you have a hard time? Would you want to argue with them? Or I have a really hard time forgiving people, right? I'm so hard on people. I'm super selfish. I can't shut my mouth. I can't quit talking. I talk over everybody all the time, right? Whatever it is, can we own that? Or does our ideological religion stop us from being honest and ironically put us in a place where we're more likely to fall than if we were just open about it? Peter's overly confident and it scandalizes him. Peter's ideological and it scandalizes him. He falls. But that's not the end of the story. which is really good news because that would be a dark ending to the sermon. Anyway, your heart's deceitful. You're probably overconfident. Good luck. Have fun messing up. In verse 28, Jesus injects this statement to this dark prophecy about Peter. I mean, can you imagine Jesus prophesying to your face personally about how screwed up you are? Like, no, you're going to mess up. Here's how, details. Here's the script you're going to follow. You're going to mess up. And Peter's like, nah, not going to happen. And Jesus says, yeah, it will, but, 28, but after I've risen, I will go ahead of you into Galilee. And Jesus shows back up, and he meets a group of women who he reveals himself to first, which is awesome, because in that society, women couldn't legally be witnesses in a court of law, because you're a woman, so it doesn't count. Obviously, you're a silly woman. You can't possibly know what happened. Like, literally, it didn't count. You could, like, watch someone get murdered, and, like, I watched them get murdered, and they're like, too bad you're a woman, or we can convict him. Jesus shows up to women as the first people to testify about his resurrection. Like, Jesus doesn't care about our stupid ideas and our cultures. He does his own thing. And we see that here when he shows up to these women, he says, okay, go and tell the disciples to meet me in Galilee, because they probably forgot, but remind them to meet me in Galilee. Oh, also the disciples and who? And Peter. Because Jesus knows that Peter probably doesn't think he's a disciple anymore. After what he did, after his declarations of faithfulness, I mean, he literally tells Jesus he doesn't know what he's talking about. Jesus says, okay, I'm the Messiah. You agree with that? Yeah. I'm the Son of God. Yeah, okay. That's all true. So I'm telling you as that person, you're going to mess up tonight. He's like, no, you're wrong. He's denying the denial, the ultimate denier. And then he fails on this epic stage in front of everybody. And it says he runs off into the night and he weeps. And there's another man who has a similar experience that night, someone named Judas, right? Judas runs off and hangs himself. Peter runs off and he weeps. They both messed up. They both denied Jesus. And yet Peter's story ends differently. Because there's a difference between guilt and shame. And I don't know if you've experienced this before, but follow me, and this might help you in some area of your life. It helped me a lot when I understood this. There's a massive difference between guilt and shame. And they kind of go together in our hearts when we've done something wrong. But shame says this. Shame says, I messed up. I'm stupid. I can't get it right. I can't believe that I would do that. Who's it about? Shame is all about me. So I wrong you, and then I turn around and I make it all about who? It's all about me. Oh, I hurt you. I did wrong. I messed up. I'm so stupid. You can never trust me again. I'm such an idiot. Oh, you shouldn't even be my friend anymore. You can't forgive me. It's me. It's all about myself. I take the whole situation, and you're out of the equation now. Shame disconnects me from the person that I've wronged. Shame separates me from the opportunity to bring healing where I caused pain. Shame separates from the opportunity to bring connection. Shame isolates us. Shame destroys, and ultimately shame leads to self-destruction, like in the story of Judas. Judas knows he did something wrong. Judas either doesn't think he can make it right or doesn't know how to make it right, and the best thing he can do is remove himself from the equation. Does that fix what he did to Jesus? Do you think Jesus loved Judas? So did that hurt Jesus or help Jesus to find out that Judas hangs himself after he wrongs Jesus? It makes it all that worse. He's like, oh my word, like this guy, like I loved him. We walked together for 3 years. Not only did he break my heart, but then he goes and he takes himself out of the equation. Like what a sad ending. Like that's not what I wanted. That doesn't pay back what was done to Jesus. Like it's this decision to accept shame into my heart, to live in shame, that not only does it not fix what I did to you, it just damages me all the worse, because I treat myself like a sacrificial victim thinking that'll fix what I did to you, and it doesn't fix anything, right? And if you've experienced shame, I don't want you to feel more shame, like, oh no, now I have shame for having shame, right? I'm trying to help you see that's not helpful. Like when you feel shame for what you did to your kids, that doesn't fix what you did to your kids. When you feel shame for what you've done to God, that doesn't fix what you did to God. When you feel shame for what you did to a partner, things you did in the dark, things that you can't make right, when you feel shame, that doesn't solve anything. All it does is damage you. And so Jesus looks at Peter and he says, you're going to do something you're going to feel shame about. But I want to remind you, Peter, that it's not about you. You've wronged me. You've disowned me, the one you've walked with 3 years. It's not about you. It's about me, Peter. You've wronged me. Because the difference between guilt and shame is, again, shame is internal. It makes it all about me. Shame basically is interrupting the person. Like, I wronged you. So someone comes to you and says, or they come to me, Jeff, you really hurt my feelings. And I'm like, oh, stop talking. Now let me talk about how terrible I am, right? Like I've made it all about me. I'm like interrupting you. I'm interrupting the whole process by making it about me. Shame takes away the power to myself and it stops healing. Guilt brings the other person back into the equation. Because guilt is saying, I did something wrong. I'm super ashamed I did it. But the focus is not, I'm dumb, I can't get it right. The point is, I wronged you. I stole your wallet, right? What's the guilt? The guilt is what I did to you. You see the difference? Guilt brings the other person back into the equation. It doesn't interrupt the healing process. It says, here's something tangible I did. I sold Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. I cursed Jesus with the worst curses I could consider in front of all these people in this temple. But guilt gives the power back to the person I wronged and gives them the opportunity to forgive me. It honors the fact this person was wronged. I did something wrong. I hurt you. You still have the power to forgive me or not forgive me. I'm giving you that. I'm not going to interrupt you with shame. I'm not going to take that power back. I'm going to risk even more pain to honor the fact I denied you, Jesus, 3 times with curses. Jesus makes it back about him. Peter, this isn't about shame. This is about guilt. You did something wrong. You did a bad thing, Peter. But I will meet you in Galilee after that. Why don't you come back and see what happens? And so Peter shows up. I mean, Peter had to be coming there with his tail between his legs, right? Like waiting for some sort of like absolute rejection by Jesus. But the fact Peter shows up tells me that maybe Peter had some hope, right? Maybe Jesus is different than Peter expected. Maybe Jesus is like as kind to him as he was to that woman caught in adultery. Maybe Peter is like that woman caught in adultery. Maybe Peter's not this great guy that needs to brag about how he's going to die for Jesus. Maybe he's different than he thought. Like the whole thing is thrown into confusion, and Peter comes to Jesus in Galilee. And there's a beautiful dialogue between Jesus and Peter. Jesus looks at Peter and he says, Peter, do you love me? The question is not, Peter, should I love you? Or Peter, should I trust you? Peter, what are you going to do to prove that you're trustworthy after such a massive fail? After a scandal on that large? None of those questions that we would ask, right? How can I know I can trust you to let you back in? Should I trust you? Should I love you? The question is simply this: Peter, do you love me? Because it's absolutely assumed from the outset that Jesus still loves Peter. All the way back in their dialogue here in Mark, where he says, Peter, you're going to fail, but I'm going to beat you to Galilee. I'll get there before you. I'm going to get to forgiveness before you even ask for it. I'm going to get to redemption before you even realize you need it. I'm going to get to like healing and growth and reinstallation of your relationship with me before you even realize you've lost it. I will always beat you there, Peter. I will always beat you to Galilee. That's a race you will always lose. You will always lose this race because I'm always there first with kindness. And Peter shows up. And Peter's blown away by the fact there's a gift waiting for him before he even gets there. I drove down to Savannah a couple years back. I've told the story before, so if you've heard it, you can hear it again. I think it fits the sermon well enough. I'm just going to retell it anyway. I traveled down to Savannah to meet a buddy. It was after a few years back after separation I went through, really kind of most gut-wrenching experience of my life. And my buddy's flying into town to speak from out in Seattle, and he's only a couple of hours away, so I'm gonna go and visit him and hang out a bit. And so, like, I get there, and right as I get there, my car dies. And I'm thinking, oh, okay, this can't be that bad, because it was a pretty new car at that point. So I take it into a shop, and they're like, yeah, we'll call you later, we'll tell you how much it is. It's not gonna be that bad, probably. And so no problem, I'm there, everything's going okay, hanging out with my buddy, feeling better. I get a call from the shop, and they say, well, actually, no, it's not gonna be done tomorrow. We can't even figure out what it is. It's so bad, we have to send it to like someone else because we can't fix it. It's gonna be super expensive. You know, you'll probably sell a kidney at this point for what it's gonna cost. So anyway, good luck, hang up. I'm like, what? So now my buddy's leaving town. I can't stay in his hotel room with him. I've got to pay for a hotel. And my bank account is dwindling like dangerously low, dollar after dollar after dollar. So I pay for a room that night, stay in the hotel, figure it can't be more than another day. Next day, we still can't figure out what's going on. We're gonna have to send it to another shop. And you'll probably have to sell like both your kidneys, so you know, you don't need a car after that, so whatever, you know, don't worry about it. Pay for another night, bank account down, down, down. My buddy's gone, I'm there alone. Car shop again. Hey, you know, we finally figured out what's wrong. It's probably gonna cost $2,000 or $3,000 to fix this thing. And it's not gonna be done for a couple days. So I hang up and I look at my bank account, and I'm down to like the fumes of my bank account. And I've got a rental car that I'm driving. I'm paying for that, paying for hotel rooms. And I do the math and I'm like, okay, I don't have enough money for this rental car. I don't have enough money for my room. Like, what am I gonna do? I can't like just stay here. And so I check out of the hotel and I take the rental car and I drive into the town to look around a little bit, just kind of distract myself. And I plan that night I'm gonna drop the car back off because I've already paid for that day. I'll drop it off back at the airport, use my last few bucks to catch an Uber or a taxi into town, like downtown Savannah, and just like sleep on a park bench. Because there was literally not even any sort of like place for men to stay. They had places for women with children, nothing for men, like nothing there. And so I'm like, I'm gonna literally be sleeping out on a park bench like a homeless person. And I have this thought, I'm like, I should call home and ask for money. Because I know my dad would give me cash. He's super generous and is a weird situation. I'm like, nah, I'm not gonna do that. Like, I'm an adult, I'm not asking for help. And so I'm stuck there, and I've never felt that stranded in my life, like physically and existentially, just like my whole life was kind of like unraveled, and I'm like there. I'm getting ready to drive, drop off the car, go sleep like a homeless person, like super ashamed of myself. Like, how did my life get to this? I can't even like, you know, keep my finances in order. It's gone. Everything is messed up. And I get this email notice. I open up my phone, flipping through my email, and this note comes up from Bank of America. It says, you've received $500 from Ron Carlson. Click on this link to get it, to receive it. And I'm like, yeah, right. Like this one, like, there's a prince in Zambia who wants to leave his fortune to you. Just send us your social security number. So I'm thinking, yeah, that's not real. But then I just had this thought. I'm like, I don't know. I mean, I might as well text my dad to make sure his bank account hasn't been hacked or something. So I text him. I'm like, hey, I got an email that you sent me money, and just wanting to make sure your account wasn't hacked or something. And he's like, no, I sent that to you. That's yours. I'm like, why did you do that? Because I hadn't called him. I hadn't asked for help. He's like, you know, I know you've been going through some hard times, and I just had a little extra cash and figured that might cheer you up a little bit. You could use it for something. And I'm thinking, yeah, I use it to not sleep on the street, right? It's probably not what he had in mind. But I stood there just in shock at the reality of a gift that I hadn't even asked for, that had been sent before I ever called. That kindness had preceded me, that goodness and mercy had not only followed me all the days of my life, but they beat me to where I was going. That in my shame that separated me, mercy was offered. That in our fallenness, in our dark hearts, in our realities where we're broken and twisted, that God not only looks into us and says, here's how you're gonna fail me, here's what you're gonna do. And we look back over our lives and we look at the ways that we have failed and we've messed up and we've scandalon and we've tripped and we've fallen. Jesus says, I will beat you to Galilee every time, and I will always be there standing with mercy and kindness for you. And it's interesting that Peter actually calls the gospel the scandalon that people trip over, because we're not real comfortable with that, are we? We trip over Jesus. We're like, well, it can't be that good. You got to be really sorry before Jesus will forgive you. Jesus doesn't ask Peter, are you really sorry? He says, do you love me? It's that simple, because I love you. I love you before you failed me. I love you while you're failing me. I love you after you're failing me. I just love you, Jesus says, to the point where I would bleed out for you. My love isn't a question. The question we trip over is, are we comfortable? Are we willing to throw ourselves into the arms of a God who doesn't care whether we fail or succeed, but he loves us because we're his children, that we're the creation of God. The Bible calls us the poema of God, workmanship. You're a poem that he wrote, and it doesn't matter how much you erase or scribble over the lines, he always sees what's there. And he's always willing to pencil back in the parts that we mess up. You're the poem of God. And the irony of the story of Peter is that Peter ends up better off because of his failure than he ever would have been without it, I think. Because Peter going through this reality, like, it doesn't fix him. Like, later on we find out Peter's still kind of racist, right? He won't eat at the table with these people, and Paul has to call him out publicly and says, Peter, you're being an idiot, you're being racist. And Peter's like, I messed up again, right? But Peter's life is set on a new trajectory, because Peter's life is now not all about him and about how great he is, how he's so good. Jesus is so lucky to have Peter, right? He's so lucky to have us, Adventists. We got it all right. Lucky Jesus, right? It's not about that stance anymore. It's about Jesus was so kind to me. I'm so lucky to have Jesus. And Peter, at the end of his life, not only goes to death for Jesus, he goes in this crazy way. There's a story of him in Rome. There's persecution in Rome, and the early church has this story that they claim is true, and it's possible. But Peter's leaving Jerusalem with all of the other Christians, and the story goes that Peter was met by an angel at the city gate and said, where are you going, Peter? And Peter's like, I was leaving. That's a good question. Why am I leaving? And so Peter turned around against all the other people that left, which was fine. The angel didn't stop them. But Peter turned around and walked back into the city. And he was captured and tried and all of these things. And they end up deciding they're going to crucify Peter. And Peter, many of you know the story, Peter asks to be crucified in a different way, because he says, Jesus is so kind. Jesus has been so amazing to me. I don't even deserve to die like him. So make it worse. Flip the thing upside down, because then it's at least different than him. I don't deserve to die like he did. And that's how he went. So something changed in Peter's life to go from, being willing to fight for Jesus, but not really being willing to, just take it. And Peter gives his life for Jesus, because Peter did trip over the gospel. Peter tripped over the scandalon of Jesus, and he fell into the arms of God, and that changed everything. There's a race Peter tried to win through his confidence, through his idealism, and he lost. And it just hurt. But then there's a race Peter lost, the race of God's grace, and it turned everything around. May you be scandalized by the gospel. May you be tripped up by the love and kindness of a God who would give himself for you. And may that free you to take off the masks that you wear, to not have to exude so much confidence in your beliefs, in your abilities, to be able to own the dark parts of our hearts and find support with each other. Ultimately, because we believe we can fall into the arms of a God who carries us through. Because you always lose the race of trying to get it right, just like Peter. But the good news is you always lose the race to forgiveness as well, because God is always waiting for you with the gift of his love before you even ask for it. May you be scandalized and let it change your life like it did Peter's. Amen.
We trust your relationship with God has been strengthened from what you have heard today. Please visit our website at www.fletchersda.org. May God give you his peace and joy.